Welcome to Freedom and Reason podcast. I'm Andrew Austin. What I want to talk to you about today is um, the what I call the rot from within the working class, and by this I'm referring to progressives. I recently uh, posted something on Facebook concerning immigration and Bernie Sanders, who has walked I don't even want to say walked back his position on immigration, seems to have abandoned his populist position on immigration, which I share, and has adopted the progressive line on immigration, and this is disappointing. And I brought that up, and I've been a Bernie defender, and I feel that the Democratic Party, w- without Bernie Sanders, uh, isn't very useful. And I was hoping that Sanders still hope in some sense that Sanders will win the nomination and that then he can sort of chart a path back towards a kind of Roosevelt style Democratic Party. Um, it's a pipe dream. First thing that I think about um, when thinking about social class matters is choice of comrades. Right? With whom do I ally? Do I side with the capitalist class or do I side with the working class? And for me, it's the working class, obviously. If you couldn't tell from the argument so far, or if you haven't read my thinking about this. And I'm talking working class Americans, working class Swedes, working class French, working class Germans, working class English, and etc. And I ally with workers in the West because the West has produced a culture that rests on the norms and values that have created the greatest prosperity, and freedom, and justice in history. And these are the humanist, liberal, rational, and secular norms and values. They're Enlightenment values. And it's vital for the sake of progress that we defend these values while advocating for workers. And the way to defend them is by defending the integrity of the nation state or the modern nation state. Okay. My thinking about the interest of workers is twofold. So I consider the material conditions of their existence. What are their life chances? Are they able to feed their family? Are they able to pay their rent? What's their standard of living? Are they able to pay it forward? I mean, are they able to pass their affluence to future generations? Do they live in a safe, stable, a rewarding social environment? These would be environments rich in common interest and a shared interest in and communal solidarity. Um, I, I oppose things that threaten these things. And the second thing I think about is the political and cultural situation. What are the necessary conditions? You have to think about this. The necessary legal and political machinery that will afford the working class the means to effectively fight for and secure their interests. And again, I oppose those things that threaten these things. Because of my theoretical frame and knowledge of social dynamics in human history, I know that the working class, even if most workers don't know this, is in an epic struggle with the capitalist class. The evidence is clear that the capitalists have been busy dismantling the political legal machinery and the cultural and social conditions that workers need to organize for their interests. The capitalists have been transforming culture and society through globalization, exporting capital, that's industrial, agricultural production, to foreign lands to exploit cheap labor over there while importing cheap labor from foreign lands to work machines in the farms over here. And American and European workers are losing their jobs to foreign workers overseas, and they're losing their jobs to foreign workers in their own countries. And they're losing their standard of living and they're losing their nations. Domestically, $500 billion. I don't think Americans have any idea about this. And I've blogged about this before. These numbers are solid. $500 billion is transferred from the native born working class of the United States of America to the capitalist class in wages annually. Those are wages that otherwise would have been paid to workers to meet their needs. In other words, what workers should receive in wages is appropriated by the capitalist class by exploiting immigrant labor. That's money the capitalists save by using cheap foreign labor domestically. Wages lost by production being taken overseas is a vast amount on top of that figure. The working class is thus fucked over in two ways celebrated by the power elite in the halls of business, government, the corporate media, and bizarrely by many on the left, which I will come to later. Workers are fucked once again by subsidizing the capitalist deployment of cheap labor in their country with the public infrastructure and public services that they provide with their tax dollars. They pay these taxes after having a vast amount of surplus value appropriated by the firms for which they labor. Thus, tens of billions more dollars are extracted from the working class to facilitate the transfer of hundreds of billions of dollars from one social class to another social class, from the class that produces value to the class that doesn't. Workers are subsidizing the very mechanism by which their standard of living is being undermined. And to facilitate all this fucking, the class that is at war with the majority of the people in this country and their cultural managers have manufactured and deployed an ideology of radical multiculturalism. It's an identitarian politics that fetishizes diversity while thwarting equality, which they have pushed down into the masses using their control over the means of ideological production. As polls indicate, the masses have largely accepted this propaganda. They've internalized the values and interests that are not organic to their social class location, and they've thus come to take the position of the capitalist class. They've been deceived. They are falsely conscious. They don't think things through or about things in the right way because they lack the theoretical tools to do so. And this is the result of indoctrination in our public schools and by a vast culture industry. Workers are taught, they're conditioned to take pride in virtue signaling support for immigrants. Cultural pluralism, different norms and values, different languages, different cultures. Workers do not see these as elements of a strategy to fuck them. And they've been taught to see them as enlightened and superior moral values. And when they complain, for those who do, are skeptical of these claims, who feel the effects of this fucking, they're accused of nativism, racism, and xenophobia. This has not always been true, as I've blogged about uh, extensively. The working class organized in the early 20th century and restricted immigration. It was a move that began a long march towards social democratic ends. At least it looked like that's where we were headed, not through revolution, but through evolution. And so cultural homogenization and national integrity, rising affluence, raised expectations, and helped form class consciousness. The West pursued social democracy wherein unions flourish, and unions pushed this social democracy. But the ruling class got wise, and in the 1960s, they opened borders to the free flow of capital and labor to the detriment of Western standard of living and its popular political organizations. Now, mind you, capitalism has been a world system, and imperialism and globalization have always existed. But in 1960, it became a very conscious strategy to fuck the working class. And so the elites disorganized national cultures and they confused the working class. And what we see in the aftermath is a disconnect between productivity and wages and benefits, compensation. Prior to globalization, successive generations did better than their parents. So my parents were able to retire on their pensions, but the situation is different now. You've heard about this. And capitalists did all this to restore high rates of profit. So, with national economic development, when we had an industrial policy coming out of World War II, the capitalists had seen declining rates of profits, and this was because of social democracy. High rates of taxation, one third of workers belonged to unions, and union power kept wages in line with productivity gains. And the ordinary Americans became affluent. They had a national culture. They had an understanding of their national interest. And a common culture was essential for this. Common language was essential for this. These developments sparked the civil rights movement, feminist, environmental movements, and capitalists were compelled to meet these popular demands at the cost of profits. And when they finally had enough, the capitalists crushed organizations of the working class through globalization and ideological manipulation. Tragically, and what we can only describe as a spectacular propaganda achievement, we see progressives demanding more globalization. They demand more immigration, more cultural disorganization, fighting against the interests of the working class. The left, this segment of the left, which appears to be the largest segment these days, has lost the thread of class struggle and the fight for sexual equality. For example, they embrace regressive ideologies like Islam, while trashing truly progressive values, the values of the West, the values of the Enlightenment that I talked about earlier. And the latest casualty of the power of the American political establishment is Bernie Sanders. And I lavish praise on Sanders for his views on immigration just a few months ago. You can read about it on my blog. Now it appears that the last left wing populist figure has been lost to the rot of progressivism.